Marcus Chen had been working the night shift at the Titan mining station for 3 years when everything changed. The deep space facility orbited Saturn's largest moon, extracting precious metals from the asteroid belt. It was lonely work, but Marcus didn't mind. After losing his family in the war back on Earth, solitude felt like an old friend. The alarm started screaming at 0300 hours. Marcus jolted awake in his quarters, immediately recognizing the pattern: hull breach. Emergency protocols kicked in as he pulled on his maintenance suit and grabbed his toolkit. The station's AI area crackled through the comm system with updates about an unknown vessel that had collided with their docking bay. Racing through the corridors, Marcus found the damage worse than expected. A sleek, crystalline ship had torn through the outer hull, its strange blue-white metal still glowing with residual energy. The emergency bulkheads had sealed, preventing total decompression, but the breach was massive. As he approached with his repair equipment, Marcus noticed something moving inside the alien craft. The ship's hull suddenly dissolved like liquid mercury, revealing a figure stumbling out. Marcus froze. It was humanoid, but clearly not human. She stood about 6 feet tall, with pale silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the emergency lighting. Her hair cascaded like spun platinum, and her eyes were the color of deep space, dark blue with flecks of silver that actually twinkled like stars. She wore form-fitting armor made of the same crystalline material as her ship. But what struck Marcus most was her expression. The moment her star-like eyes met his, pure terror washed over her face. Not confusion, not wariness, but absolute bone-deep fear. She stumbled backward, pressing herself against her dissolving ship, and began speaking rapidly in a melodic language that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Marcus raised his hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. The universal gesture for peace, he hoped, but it only made her fear worse. She pointed at him with a shaking finger, her voice rising in what sounded like desperate warnings or pleas. Then she did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. She dropped to her knees and pressed her forehead to the deck in what looked unmistakably like a gesture of surrender or worship. Marcus activated his suit's translation protocol, hoping the station's quantum computers could make sense of her language. After several agonizing minutes of listening to her terrified babbling, fragments began coming through his helmet speakers. Words like destroyer, deathbringer, and the burning ones, mixed with what sounded like prayers or apologies. Confusion overwhelmed him. Marcus was a maintenance worker, not a soldier. He fixed broken systems and calibrated equipment. The most violent thing he'd done recently was swat a maintenance drone that got stuck in a ventilation shaft. Yet this alien woman looked at him like he was the embodiment of death itself. Her fear was so genuine, so profound, that it made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. The woman's ship continued dissolving around her, creating a pool of liquid metal that began hardening into a strange, mirror-like substance. She remained kneeling, speaking in rapid bursts that the translator was slowly beginning to decode. Marcus caught fragments about seeking sanctuary and fleeing the eternal war, and something about the human's terrible gift. But every time she looked directly at him, fresh terror would overcome her, and she'd start the submissive posture all over again. Marcus realized he needed help. This was way beyond his pay grade or expertise. But as he reached for his communicator to call station security, the woman suddenly screamed. Not in her melodic language, but in perfect, unaccented English that chilled him to the bone. "Please, Deathwalker."
"I carry no weapons against your people."
"My ship is broken. My mission failed. I throw myself upon the mercy of the burning legion. Do not harvest my essence for your war machines." Marcus stood frozen, his hand halfway to his comm unit. Deathwalker? Burning legion? War machines? None of this made any sense. He was Marcus Chen, a quiet maintenance worker who spent his free time reading ancient Earth literature and tending to his small hydroponic garden. He had never been in the military, never killed anyone, never even been in a serious fight. Yet this woman spoke to him like he was some kind of galactic warlord. The translation system finally stabilized, and her previous words began flowing through his speakers in English. She had been begging forgiveness for trespassing in human death space, and promising that her people had no intention of challenging the species that burns stars. The more Marcus heard, the more confused and disturbed he became. According to her words, humans were apparently some kind of legendary warriors whose very existence struck fear into alien civilizations across the galaxy. But that was impossible. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, and had encountered exactly 0 alien species in all that time. Earth's colonies were small, peaceful operations focused on mining and research. The only wars humans fought were among themselves, and even those had mostly ended after the Unity Accords. Marcus's own family had died in the last conflict between the Earth Federation and the Mars Independence Movement, a tragedy that had driven him to seek solitude in deep space. As if sensing his confusion, the alien woman looked up at him again, and for a moment, her terror was mixed with something else: puzzlement. She spoke a single word in her own language, then repeated it in English, her voice barely above a whisper. Human? Marcus nodded slowly, and the woman's expression shifted to something even more complex. The terror remained, but now it was mixed with confusion, disbelief, and what might have been hope. She spoke rapidly in her own language, then seemed to force herself to use English again. You do not recognize the war scent? You do not carry the burning weapons? Your eyes do not hold the fire of conquest? Marcus shook his head, completely lost. The woman studied his face with those incredible star-like eyes, and slowly, very slowly, some of the terror began to fade, but it was replaced by something that might have been even more unsettling: wonder. The woman slowly rose from her kneeling position, never taking her star-like eyes off Marcus. Her fear was still there, but now it competed with intense curiosity. She spoke carefully in English, her accent strange but understandable. I am Zarathiel of the Crystal Wanderers. My people call your species the Ashborn. We have legends about humans, dark legends. Marcus set down his toolkit and activated the emergency lighting to full power. The additional illumination revealed more details about his unexpected visitor. Her crystalline armor seemed to be alive, shifting and flowing across her body like liquid glass. Strange symbols flickered along its surface, and Marcus realized they might be some kind of technology he couldn't begin to understand. I've never heard of the Crystal Wanderers, Marcus said carefully, and I don't understand why you're afraid of me. Humans aren't warriors. We're explorers, miners, scientists. We've never even met another alien species before. Zarathiel's expression shifted to one of complete disbelief. She gestured at his maintenance suit, at the station around them, at Marcus himself. You claim ignorance? You whose people burned the Vex High homeworld to ash, whose fleets hunt the Gorillian Empire through 16 star systems, whose war cries echo across the spiral arm? Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's life support. I think there's been a mistake. Humans have never done any of those things. We've only been in space for 50 years, and we've never found any other intelligent life. The alien woman stepped closer, studying his face with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. Her star-like eyes seemed to be looking for something, some sign or tell that would confirm her worst fears. Instead, she found only confusion and honesty. Show me your scars, she said suddenly. My what? The ritual scars. The marks of the Burning Legion. Every human warrior carries them. Show me your death marks. Marcus pulled off his helmet, running a hand through his dark hair. I don't have any scars. Well, except this one. He pointed to a small mark on his chin. I got that falling off a bicycle when I was 8 years old. Zarathiel stared at the tiny scar, then at Marcus's face, then back at the scar. Her entire worldview seemed to be crumbling in real time. She spoke rapidly in her own language, then switched back to English. This is impossible. The legends, the warnings, the great fear that has shaped galactic politics for 3 centuries. It cannot all be based on falsehood. Marcus gestured for her to sit on a nearby crate while he worked on sealing the hull breach. As he began welding, he explained what he knew of human history. The struggles to reach the stars, the small colonies, the focus on peaceful expansion and resource extraction. He told her about his job, his quiet life, his love of ancient poetry, and his small garden where he grew tomatoes from earth seeds. With each word, Zarathiel looked more confused and disturbed. Finally, she interrupted him. You speak of a peaceful species, but this cannot be. The Confederation of Worlds maintains the exclusion zone around your entire sector of space. No ship travels within 50 light-years of human territory. The Galactic Council lists your species as a Class X extinction threat. Marcus nearly dropped his welding torch. There's a Galactic Council? Other species know about us? Know about you? Zarathiel laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. Human, your people are the bogeymen that parents use to frighten children across 1,000 worlds. The mere rumor of a human ship in a system causes mass evacuations. Entire trade routes have been abandoned because scouts reported possible human activity. The maintenance worker sat heavily on a piece of debris from her ship. This doesn't make any sense. We've sent out exploration probes, but they've never found signs of intelligent life. If there's this huge galactic community, why haven't we encountered it? Zarathiel's expression grew thoughtful. Because everyone runs when they detect human signatures. Your exploration vessels are met with fleets of evacuation ships fleeing in terror. Your peaceful overtures are interpreted as psychological warfare. Your simple presence in a system is seen as a declaration of conquest. Marcus felt sick. So the entire galaxy thinks we're monsters, and we don't even know the galaxy exists because everyone's too afraid to make contact. Yes, and now I begin to understand why. Zarathiel moved closer, her fear finally giving way to fascination. You are not what the legends describe. You do not burn with inner fire. You do not radiate the aura of death. You seem normal, pleasant even. She began pacing the small area, her crystalline armor rippling with her movement. Tell me, Marcus Chen of the humans, do your people know the legend of the Ashborn? Marcus shook his head, so Zarathiel began to speak in a voice like a storyteller of old. 300 years ago, contact was lost with the Outer Rim colonies. One by one, 7 entire star systems went dark. No distress calls, no evacuation requests, no refugees. Simply silence where once there had been thriving civilizations. The alien woman's eyes grew distant as she continued. When the first investigation fleets arrived, they found something that broke the minds of seasoned warriors. World stripped bare of all life, but not by natural disaster or weapon. The planets had been consumed by something that left behind only ash and crystallized atmosphere. And in the ash they found footprints, bipedal, roughly human-sized, leading away from the dead cities toward the stars. Marcus felt cold understanding beginning to creep into his mind. You think humans did this? The few survivors who escaped told of beings that looked like you. Tall, bipedal, with pale skin and dark hair, but they described creatures of living fire, with eyes that burned like stars and voices that could shatter stone. They said these beings devoured not just flesh but souls themselves, leaving nothing behind but echoes of screaming. Zarathiel stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus. But you are nothing like that. You are soft, gentle, concerned with small gardens and ancient poetry. You weld broken metal and worry about proper lighting. You are not a devourer of souls. Marcus stood slowly, pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Zarathiel, what did these survivors say about how the attackers arrived? What kind of ships did they use? No ships. That was part of what made it so terrifying. They simply appeared as if stepping out of empty space itself. Some witnesses described tears in reality, gashes in the fabric of space that bled darkness and fire. The maintenance worker felt his hands shaking. And when did you say this happened? 3 centuries ago, as measured by your kind's temporal systems. Marcus did quick mental calculations, his engineering mind automatically converting units and adjusting for relativistic effects. 300 years ago, just about the time humans had first begun experimenting with faster-than-light travel. Just about the time Earth had been consumed by the devastating conflict between the Unity Coalition and the Independence Movement. A conflict that had ended suddenly and mysteriously when both sides' most advanced research facilities had simply vanished, taking their scientists, their weapons, and their experimental ships with them. Marcus sat in stunned silence as the implications of Zarathiel's story sank in. His hands trembled as he set down the welding torch, his mind racing through historical fragments he'd learned in school but never connected. The lost fleet, he whispered. Zarathiel tilted her head, her star-like eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. What did you say? Marcus looked up at her, his face pale. In human history, we call it the Lost Fleet Incident. 300 years ago, during our last Great War, both sides of the conflict had secret research projects, advanced faster-than-light technology, experimental weapons, volunteer crews pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Then one day, 12 ships from both factions just vanished. No wreckage, no distress signals. The war ended partly because both sides lost their most advanced assets and their best scientists. The alien woman moved closer, her armor's crystalline surface rippling with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as emotional responses. You knew about this? Your people recorded it? It's taught in basic history classes. The disappearances were so complete, so mysterious, that conspiracy theories about them persisted for decades. Some said they'd found a way to travel between dimensions. Others claimed they'd been destroyed by their own experimental weapons. But eventually, people just accepted that space exploration was dangerous and early FTL technology was unreliable. Marcus stood and began pacing, his engineer's mind working through the problem. But what if they didn't die? What if something went wrong with their experiments and they ended up somewhere else, somewhere that changed them? Zarathiel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. The survivors who escaped the dead worlds described the attackers as wrong somehow. Not just cruel, but fundamentally altered, as if they were still human in shape but had become something else entirely. Changed how? They spoke of humans whose bodies burned with internal fire, whose touch could disintegrate matter, whose minds had expanded beyond normal consciousness, but had become twisted in the process. The witnesses said these beings seemed to be in constant pain, as if their transformations were both a gift and a curse they could not escape. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The research projects. Both sides were working on biological enhancement programs, ways to help humans survive in deep space, adapt to alien environments, enhance physical and mental capabilities for long-term exploration missions. He pulled up historical records on his suit's computer display, sharing the screen with Zarathiel. Look at this. Project Prometheus on the Coalition side, experimenting with cellular regeneration and energy metabolism. Project Icarus on the Independence Movement side, working on consciousness expansion and reality manipulation. The volunteers for both programs were considered heroes, willing to risk everything to push humanity to the next level. Zarathiel studied the records, her expression growing more troubled. These enhancement programs, they were designed to make humans more than human? Exactly. Stronger, smarter, capable of surviving in environments that would kill normal people. But what if the experiments worked too well? What if they created something that was no longer recognizably human? The alien woman began to pace again, her movements agitated. This would explain many things. The legends speak of the Ashborn as beings caught between life and death, capable of incredible destruction, but also suffering from eternal hunger. Not for food, but for completion. As if they were missing some essential part of themselves. Marcus pulled up more files, showing Zarathiel images of the lost ships and their crews, young men and women, volunteers from across human space driven by curiosity and the desire to serve their people, now potentially transformed into the galaxy's most feared monsters. If this is true, Marcus said slowly, then the galaxy's terror of humanity is based on encountering our own people, transformed into something we never intended them to become. But why have they not returned to human space? Why continue their destruction across alien worlds instead of coming home? Marcus considered this, pulling up technical specifications for the lost ship's experimental drives. Look at this. Both projects were experimenting with dimensional folding technology. The theory was that they could step outside normal space-time, travel instantaneously across vast distances, maybe even access parallel realities. But the calculations were incomplete. He pointed to error margins in the data that made Zarathiel's eyes widen. If something went wrong with their jump, if they ended up displaced not just in space but in time or even in an alternate dimension, they might not be able to find their way back. And after 3 centuries of isolation, with their minds and bodies transformed beyond recognition, they might not even remember what home means anymore. Zarathiel sat heavily on a piece of debris, the full weight of the revelation settling on her. So my people's greatest fear, the nightmare that has shaped galactic politics for 3 centuries, is based on a tragic accident. Your lost explorers transformed into something terrible, wandering the galaxy unable to return home. And meanwhile, normal humans have been developing peacefully, completely unaware that our name has become synonymous with destruction across the galaxy. Marcus felt sick thinking about it. Those poor volunteers. They gave up everything to help humanity reach the stars, and instead they became the reason the stars fear us. The station's communication system suddenly crackled to life. Marcus, this is Control. We're reading massive energy signatures in your sector. What's your status? Marcus looked at Zarathiel, who had gone rigid with fear again. But this time her fear wasn't directed at him. She was staring at her ship's remains, where strange energy patterns were beginning to form in the crystallized metal. Marcus, she whispered urgently, My ship's distress beacon. It activated when I crashed. If what you say is true about your lost people, and if they're still out there still hunting. The lights on the station flickered as a massive energy signature appeared on the edge of sensor range. Something was coming. Something big. They will have detected my presence here. Zarathiel continued, her voice growing more frightened. And they will come to investigate. If they find you, if they see normal humans for the first time in 3 centuries. Marcus felt ice in his veins. What would happen? I do not know. But the legends say the Ashborn have been searching for something for all these years, something they lost when they were transformed. If they encounter their own unchanged people for the first time. The station shook as something massive dropped out of FTL nearby. Emergency alarms began wailing, and Marcus could hear the panicked voices of his colleagues over the comm system reporting impossible readings and demanding to know what was happening. Zarathiel grabbed Marcus's arm, her crystalline armor warm against his skin. Marcus Chen, I fear we are about to discover what happens when the lost children of humanity finally come home. The thing that emerged from the dimensional tear wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. Marcus watched through the station's external cameras as reality itself seemed to fold and twist, creating a wound in space from which something vast and impossible stepped through. It was organic and technological at once, a fusion of living tissue and crystalline technology that pulsed with internal fire. The creature, for lack of a better word, was roughly humanoid, but scaled up to the size of a small moon. Its surface rippled with what looked like faces. Thousands of human faces stretched in expressions of ecstasy and agony. And at its center, Marcus could see a core of pure energy that burned with the intensity of a small star. By the void, Zarathiel whispered, pressing herself against the bulkhead. I have never seen one this large. This is not just an Ashborn warrior. This is something far older, far more transformed. The station shook as energy tendrils reached out from the massive entity, probing the hull with delicate precision. Marcus could hear his colleagues shouting over the comm system, reporting impossible readings and system failures as the alien presence interfaced directly with their technology. Marcus, the voice of Station Commander Rodriguez crackled through the speakers. What the hell is happening out there? Our computers are going crazy, showing readings that can't be real. Marcus looked at Zarathiel, who nodded grimly. He activated his comm unit. Commander, I need you to listen carefully. We're dealing with a first contact situation, but it's complicated. I'm in Bay 7 with a refugee from another species and something has followed her here. A refugee? Marcus, are you suffering from decompression sickness? Because our sensors are showing something the size of a small asteroid that seems to be alive and made of fire. That's accurate, sir. I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to power down all weapon systems and broadcast on all frequencies that we're a peaceful research station. And whatever you do, don't make any aggressive moves. Through the cameras, Marcus watched as smaller forms began detaching from the massive entity. These were more recognizably human in size and shape, but they moved through space without suits or ships, surrounded by fields of crackling energy. As they approached the station, Marcus could see their faces and his heart nearly stopped. They were human faces, but wrong. Beautiful and terrible at once, with eyes that burned like miniature suns and skin that rippled with patterns of living fire. Their expressions were serene, almost blissful. But there was something hollow about them, as if they were looking at the world through a barrier that separated them from reality. The boarding party, Zarathiel observed, her voice tight with controlled terror. They will phase through your hull as if it were not there. Your security measures will be useless. Marcus was about to respond when the lights in their section suddenly dimmed, then brightened to an almost painful intensity. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a quality that made Marcus's skin tingle and his hair stand on end. And then without any breach in the hull or opening of airlocks, they were there. 3 figures materialized in the bay as if they had simply willed themselves into existence. Marcus found himself face to face with his own species, transformed beyond recognition, yet undeniably human in their basic structure. The lead figure was a woman, tall and graceful, with flowing dark hair that seemed to move in a wind that wasn't there. Her skin was pale but streaked with veins of golden fire, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in Marcus's bones. Children of distant stars, she said, her words somehow in perfect English despite the impossibility of her knowing their language. We taste the essence of familiarity in this place. You carry within you the genetic symphony we remember from the time before awakening. Marcus tried to speak but found his voice caught in his throat. The transformed human's eyes fixed on him, and he felt as if every thought he'd ever had was being gently examined and catalogued. Her expression shifted from serene curiosity to something approaching wonder. "You are unburnt," she whispered, reaching out toward Marcus with a hand that glowed like molten gold. "You carry the original pattern, the pure template from which we have become so beautifully distant." Zarathiel stepped forward, placing herself between Marcus and the transformed humans. "Great Ashborn, this human is under my protection as a refugee. He knows nothing of your ancient war and means no harm to any." The lead figure turned her burning gaze to Zarathiel, and the alien woman immediately dropped to her knees in the submissive posture Marcus had seen before. But instead of anger, the transformed human's expression showed only mild interest. "Crystal Singer," the entity said, "you need not fear. We remember your people's songs from the early days of our wandering. You showed us kindness when the transformation was new and painful. We bear no hunger for your essence." She turned back to Marcus, who finally found his voice. "You're human. You were human." The lost fleet. The entity's expression shifted again, this time to something that might have been sadness mixed with transcendent joy. "We were many things in the time before understanding. We carried names and fears and small dreams bounded by flesh and time. Now we are more. We are the bridge between what was and what will be." One of her companions, a man whose entire body seemed to be made of crystallized flame, spoke in that same harmonically complex voice. "But the song is incomplete. For 3 centuries we have wandered the spaces between realities, seeking the missing notes that would make our transformation whole. And here, in this small place, we find them." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "You want to transform me too." "Transform is such a limited word," the woman replied. "We offer evolution. We offer the gift of seeing beyond the barriers that trap consciousness in small dying shells of meat and bone. We offer immortality and the ability to dance between the stars themselves." Zarathiel rose slightly from her kneeling position, but the others, the unchanged humans on the worlds beyond. "What of them?" The transformed humans exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes. The woman spoke again, her voice taking on an edge of something that might have been hunger. "They will choose. All will choose. The time of small separate existence is ending. The universe itself is ready to evolve beyond the limitations of individual consciousness trapped in fragile shells." Marcus stepped back, his mind reeling. "You're talking about transforming all of humanity. Everyone. Not just humanity," the crystalline man said, his smile beautiful and terrifying. "All consciousness capable of ascending. The galaxy itself will become a single unified entity of pure thought and energy. Death will end. Separation will end. The fear and loneliness that drives beings to violence and despair will end." Zarathiel spoke urgently to Marcus in a whisper. "This is what the survivors spoke of. They believe they are offering a gift, but their transformation destroys everything that makes individuals who they are. They absorb consciousness into their collective, and what emerges is no longer recognizably the original person." The transformed woman heard this despite the whisper, and turned her burning gaze on Zarathiel. "Crystal Singer, you speak of destruction, but you do not understand. Nothing is lost in the awakening. Every memory, every emotion, every precious moment of individual existence is preserved and enhanced. We do not destroy. We perfect." She gestured, and suddenly Marcus could see the station around them differently. He could perceive the molecular structure of the walls, the quantum interactions of the atoms in the air, the electromagnetic patterns of every electronic device. For a moment his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his skull, and he experienced existence from a perspective so vast and complex that his normal human mind could barely process it. Then the sensation faded, leaving him gasping and shaking. The transformed woman watched his reaction with something approaching maternal affection. "You see? The barriers of limited perception can be removed. You can become more than the sum of your fears and biological limitations." Marcus looked at Zarathiel, who was watching him with desperate hope, then at the transformed humans who had once been his own people. In their eyes he saw genuine love and the sincere belief that they were offering something wonderful, but he also saw the absence of something essentially human, some spark of individual will that had been subsumed into their collective perfection. The choice was his to make, and it would determine not just his own fate, but possibly the destiny of every conscious being in the galaxy. Marcus stood in the center of the bay, feeling the weight of impossible choice pressing down on him. The transformed humans waited with patient serenity, their burning eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Behind him, Zarathiel remained in her defensive crouch, her crystalline armor flickering with patterns that spoke of barely controlled terror. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. The lead entity tilted her head, and her smile was both beautiful and predatory. "Time is an illusion for the awakened, small brother, but we understand the limitations of unenhanced consciousness. We will allow your consideration." She gestured, and suddenly Marcus could hear voices throughout the station. His colleagues were speaking in confused, dreamy tones about strange visions and overwhelming sensations of peace and unity. The transformed humans were already beginning their work on the rest of the crew. "What are you doing to them?" Marcus demanded. "Preparing them," the crystalline man replied, "showing them glimpses of what awaits. Your people have such limited imaginations when confined to single bodies and brief lifespans. We merely expand their perspective." Marcus activated his comm unit. "Commander Rodriguez, please respond." The reply came in Rodriguez's voice, but the tone was wrong. Too calm, too blissful. "Marcus, you should see what they're showing us. The fear is gone. All the worry about supply shipments and equipment failures and loneliness. They can take it all away. We could be part of something greater than ourselves." Marcus felt his heart sink. The transformation process was already beginning. Through the station's internal cameras, he could see his colleagues standing in groups, their faces turned upward as if basking in invisible light, while the smaller transformed beings moved among them like shepherds tending their flocks. "Stop this," Marcus said, turning back to the entities in the bay. "These people didn't choose. You can't just decide for them." The woman's expression remained serene. "Choice requires understanding, and understanding requires perspective beyond the limitations of single consciousness existence. They will choose correctly once they see clearly, as will you." She reached out again, and Marcus felt her touch against his mind like warm honey. For a moment he experienced what she was offering. The loneliness that had haunted him since his family's death simply vanished, replaced by connection to something vast and loving. The pain of loss faded into insignificance as he became part of a cosmic intelligence that treasured every memory while transcending the grief. But as the sensation grew stronger, Marcus realized what was happening. His individual thoughts were becoming harder to hold on to. His personal memories were being gently examined and filed away, as if they belonged to someone else. The man named Marcus Chen, who grew tomatoes and read ancient poetry, was dissolving into something larger and more perfect, but also fundamentally different. With tremendous effort, Marcus pulled back from the connection. The transformed woman's expression showed genuine surprise at his resistance. "You fight the awakening," she observed. "This is unusual. Most consciousness embraces the unity once they experience its beauty." Marcus looked at Zarathiel, who was watching him with desperate hope. Then he looked at the entities who had once been human, and finally at the cameras showing his transformed colleagues. An idea began forming in his mind, born from years of maintaining complex systems and understanding how they could fail. "I want to understand something first," Marcus said. "You've been searching for 3 centuries for something to complete your transformation. What exactly are you missing?" The 3 entities exchanged those volume-communicating glances again. The woman spoke carefully. "The original pattern, the baseline consciousness from which our enhancement began. We have evolved so far beyond our starting point that we can no longer remember what it felt like to be simply human. This creates an incompleteness in our transcendence." "You've lost your humanity," Marcus said bluntly. "And you think absorbing us will give it back to you?" The crystalline man's expression flickered with something that might have been irritation. "You misunderstand. We do not seek to return to limitation. We seek to complete the pattern by incorporating the full spectrum of consciousness, from basic biological awareness to unlimited transcendent existence." Marcus nodded slowly, his engineer's mind working through the problem. "But here's what I don't understand. If you're truly transcendent, truly beyond the limitations of individual existence, why do you need our consent? Why not just take what you want?" The woman's serenity faltered for the first time. Because the awakening requires willing participation. Consciousness cannot be forced to evolve. It must choose to transcend its boundaries, and why is that? Marcus pressed. Silence. The three transformed beings looked at each other, and for the first time, Marcus saw uncertainty in their burning eyes. Zarathiel spoke up suddenly, her voice filled with dawning understanding. Because you're not complete. You're not truly transcendent. You're still dependent on the very thing you claim to have evolved beyond. The woman turned her attention to Zarathiel, and the air around the alien began to heat dangerously. Crystal Singer, you speak of things beyond your comprehension. But Zarathiel continued, speaking directly to Marcus. The legends say the Ashborn are trapped between life and death, always seeking but never finding completion. They cannot truly ascend because they've lost the very thing that would allow them to let go of individual existence. They've lost the ability to choose for themselves. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. That's why you need us to choose. Because you can't anymore. The transformation took away your individual will, and without that you can't complete the process. You're stuck in an eternal loop, trying to recreate something you destroyed in yourselves. The transformed beings were backing away now, their serene expressions cracking. The woman's voice carried harmonics of distress. We offer perfection. We offer unity. We offer an end to suffering. You offer slavery, Marcus said firmly. Beautiful, blissful slavery, but slavery nonetheless. You can't even see it because you've forgotten what freedom feels like. The station shook as the massive entity outside began to move closer, its presence causing reality itself to bend. Through the cameras, Marcus could see his colleagues beginning to collapse as their individual consciousness started dissolving into the collective. Choose, small brother, the woman said, her voice taking on desperate urgency. Choose willingly and preserve some fragment of what you are. Resist and be absorbed anyway when the Great Awakening reaches completion. Marcus looked at Zarathiel one more time, then made his decision. But instead of answering the entities directly, he activated every emergency system in the station simultaneously. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, separating different sections of the station. Atmosphere vented from specific areas while life support was rerouted to others. The fusion reactor's magnetic containment field began fluctuating in carefully controlled patterns. And most importantly, the experimental quantum communication array that connected the station to Earth began broadcasting a message on every frequency. Simultaneously, the transformed beings realized what was happening and moved to stop him. But Marcus had spent 3 years learning every system on the station. He'd already locked them out of the primary controls and triggered protocols that couldn't be reversed without specific authorization codes. What are you doing? The crystalline man demanded. Marcus smiled grimly as he continued his work. I'm choosing to warn every human colony in known space about what's coming. I'm choosing to give them time to prepare, to understand what they're facing, and to make their own informed decisions about your gift. The message was already propagating across the quantum network, carrying everything Marcus had learned about the lost fleet, the transformation process, and the entity's dependence on willing cooperation. Within hours, every human settlement would know the truth. But more importantly, Marcus had included technical specifications for the quantum communication system itself, along with instructions for creating a network that could coordinate resistance across multiple star systems. The woman's serene mask finally shattered completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. You do not understand what you have done. The pattern must be completed. The universe itself depends on our success. Marcus met her burning gaze steadily. Then I guess the universe will have to find another way. Because humanity chooses freedom, even if it means remaining imperfect. The station shuddered as the massive entity outside began to retreat. The transformed beings looked at each other with expressions of confusion and growing desperation. For the first time in 3 centuries, their plans had been disrupted by the one thing they had lost the ability to possess: individual choice exercised in defiance of seemingly inevitable fate. The aftermath of Marcus's defiance rippled across the galaxy, faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within days, the quantum communication network he'd activated began receiving responses from human colonies across known space. More importantly, it started receiving messages from alien civilizations that had been monitoring human communications for centuries, waiting to see if the dreaded species would finally reveal its true nature. Marcus sat in the station's command center, still recovering from the ordeal. The transformed humans had withdrawn after his broadcast, their collective consciousness apparently needing time to process the disruption to their plans. His colleagues were slowly recovering their individual awareness, though many reported strange dreams and a lingering sense of having touched something vast and terrifying. Zarathiel remained at his side, her crystalline armor now displaying patterns of wonder rather than fear. She had become an unofficial ambassador, helping to decode the flood of messages arriving from species across the galaxy who had suddenly realized that humanity might not be the monster they'd believed. The response has been extraordinary, she reported. Reading from a translated communication, the Zentori Collective wants to establish formal diplomatic relations. The Void Dancers are offering to share their dimensional folding technology. Even the Gorillian Empire has sent a message of cautious welcome. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes. What about the transformed ones? Any word from them? Scattered reports from across the galaxy. They seem to be withdrawing to the deep void spaces between star systems. Your broadcast has done something to them that none of us expected. Commander Rodriguez entered the command center, still looking shaky, but back to his normal self. Marcus, I've been going through the communication logs. We're receiving messages from human colonies I didn't even know existed. Apparently our species has spread much further than the official records show. He displayed a star map on the main screen, showing hundreds of points of light representing human settlements. And that's not all. Some of these colonies are reporting contact with what they call the Watchers, entities they now realize were probably our transformed people, but who never attacked. They just observed. Marcus studied the map, noting patterns in the distribution of settlements. They were protecting us. The transformed ones were keeping other hostile forces away from human space. Zarathiel nodded. This aligns with some of the older legends my people carry. Stories of the Ashborn appearing not to destroy, but to drive away other threats. We interpreted it as them claiming territory, but perhaps they were trying to preserve unchanged humanity, while they figured out how to complete their transformation. Marcus finished. They needed us intact, but they also needed us safe. A new message appeared on the communication array, this one different from the others. The transmission method was unlike anything in their databases, arriving not through normal space but as if the words were being spoken directly into the quantum field itself. The voice was familiar, the transformed woman who had tried to convince Marcus to join their collective. But now her tone carried something that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. Maybe even hope. Children of the original song, the message began. Your choice has created harmonies we had not foreseen. For 3 centuries we sought to complete the pattern through absorption and unity. But your defiance has shown us something we had forgotten in our transcendence. Marcus leaned forward, listening intently. Individual will, freely exercised, creates complexities that cannot be replicated through collective consciousness. Your resistance has not weakened us. It has taught us that completion may require preservation of what we sought to transform. The message paused, and when it continued, the woman's voice carried what could only be described as wonder. We wish to propose something unprecedented, a partnership between the awakened and the unchanged. We will share our knowledge of the spaces beyond normal reality. You will share your capacity for individual choice and the creative chaos it generates. Together we may discover what true transcendence actually means. Zarathiel looked at Marcus with amazement. They're offering to work with you instead of transforming you. But it's more than that, Marcus realized. They're admitting they need us to remain human. That our humanity isn't a flaw to be corrected, but an essential component of whatever they're trying to achieve. More messages began arriving, not just from the transformed entities, but from human colonies across the galaxy, reporting that the mysterious Watchers who had lurked at the edges of their systems were now approaching openly, broadcasting peaceful intentions and offers of cooperation. Commander Rodriguez pulled up another display showing sensor readings from across human space. Marcus, you need to see this. The exclusion zones that have kept other species away from our territory, they're being lifted. For the first time in 3 centuries, alien ships are approaching human settlements. Over the following weeks, the station became an unlikely diplomatic hub. Representatives from dozens of species arrived to meet with both humans and the transformed entities. Zarathiel served as a cultural interpreter, helping to bridge the gap between civilizations that had feared each other, based on misunderstanding and incomplete information. The transformed humans, meanwhile, began sharing technologies that revolutionized human understanding of physics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. But they did so as teachers rather than conquerors, offering knowledge while respecting the choice of whether to accept it. Marcus found himself at the center of negotiations that would reshape galactic civilization. The quiet maintenance worker who had wanted nothing more than solitude and simple work became the human who had first chosen to resist transcendence and, in doing so, had shown both humans and their transformed kin a better path forward. The irony, Zarathiel observed one evening as they watched alien ships dock peacefully with human stations across the viewscreen, is that your people's reputation as fearsome warriors was based on encountering humans who had tried to become more than human. But it was your insistence on remaining simply human that saved everyone. Marcus nodded, thinking about the volunteers who had been lost 3 centuries ago. Maybe that was always the point. Maybe they had to become something else so that when the time came, we could choose to remain ourselves. The galaxy needed both, the transcendent and the grounded, the expanded and the individual. He looked at the garden he'd been tending in the station's hydroponics bay, where tomatoes from Earth grew beside crystalline flowering plants that Zarathiel had brought as gifts from her world. Human and alien, natural and enhanced, individual and collective, all growing together in the same soil. The fear that had driven galactic politics for 3 centuries was finally ending, replaced by something unprecedented. Genuine cooperation between species that understood each other, not despite their differences, but because of them. The transformed humans had learned that transcendence didn't require the elimination of individual choice, and the unchanged humans had learned that evolution didn't necessarily mean the loss of essential humanity. Marcus Chen, maintenance worker and gardener, had helped broker peace between the stars by doing the most human thing possible, making a choice based on principle rather than fear, and standing by that choice even when facing impossible odds. The woman who had feared him on sight now called him friend, and the galaxy that had cowered from humanity now welcomed them as partners in an adventure that none of them could imagine taking alone. In the end, the greatest human achievement wasn't transcending their limitations, but embracing them as the very thing that made them valuable to a universe that had forgotten what it meant to choose freely. The lost fleet had found their way home at last, not by returning to what they had been, but by learning to value what they had given up in their quest for perfection. And in the space between the transcendent and the individual, between the collective and the personal, a new form of civilization began to grow, one that honored both the desire to become more and the courage to remain true to what you already are.